Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to James Peaty, who is the writer and director of 3 short films, and he is also a writer of comic books, including the Doctor Who magazine, 2000 AD, Judge Dredd the magazine, as well as Supergirl, a Green Arrow and Justice League. So there's a whole resume of interesting writing, and I really wanted to talk to him because I had just seen Thor, Love and Thunder, and I sort of wanted to get his take on the whole comic book universe cinematic mashup, and you will hear that we did, and we talked talked in depth about that, but also about popular Hollywood filmmaking. This conversation, I think, works very well as a sequel, part of the franchise, part of the Writers on Film cinematic universe. With one of the first conversations I did with Tom Schoen, and actually I've done 2 conversations with Tom Schoen, who wrote the book Blockbuster, and it's an attempt to reappraise blockbusters, not as the sort of sellout, destruction, death of cinema, anti-Scorsese, anti-New Hollywood sort of phenomena, but, you know, on their own merits. And so I think this conversation really goes well, and I certainly felt that a lot of my assumptions were being pushed back on in this conversation. I'm very happy to sort of reappraise my own position, talking to someone like James, who really knows his stuff and has something of an insider's view as well of the comic book industry, I guess. This is also going to be part 1 of a 2-part conversation, because we have not in any way exhausted the possibilities. So you can expect a sequel to this conversation, as well as with all good franchise cinema. We've left it open-ended and ready to carry on at a moment's notice. Please remember, if you enjoy the episode, to like, subscribe, do all the things, leave reviews. That's apparently very helpful. You can find all these podcasts on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, but you've already found me, so I guess you're already here. Before you do that, let's just go into the conversation.
into 2000 AD in particular. Oh, well, it's a kind of long and winding road. Like yourself, I read it when I was younger. I sort of read it, I think, late 80s through to the mid 90s. And a lot of people lulled in the mid 90s if we go back and kind of go through the history of the title. But I'd read it when I was young, and I was a fan of the 2000 AD magazine, in particular when it launched. I think 1990, before the Dread film. I think it was about 1990 it launched. I was a big reader of that, but I was a big reader of comics in general. And then I was, as I got older, and I used to go to conventions a lot as well. I used to go to the big UCAT convention in London. So I was sort of around all the kind of people who were working in comics, and it was a very vibrant time. It was around, I think the first UCAC I went to was the September, October after the Batman movie had come out, the Tim Burton one. So it was a big deal, all that. So I was I was about 14, I think, when I went to that con, and I was it looked like a feasible thing you could do. So it kind of maybe set me on a dark and twisted path. So years later, I sort of joined a comics writers group through that, run by the Comics Creators Guild and a cartoon art trust. And I tried to get into 2000. I actually had a strip commissioned in the late 90s, and I wrote a script, and then it was it was then uncommissioned by the incoming editor. And I think that was about 97, 98 when I came out. So I was quite young. I was in my early 20s, 20 even, maybe 21 around then. And I sort of went, I'm not going to do what worked for 2000 AD, Sodom. So I went away, and I did other things for the next, nearly 20 plus years, 20 years, I think. It was, if that was 97, I started working for the comic, I think, in 2016, 2017. So, but I'd gone off and worked in other areas of comics during that time. So I worked for, my first published stuff was for DC Thompson in the late 90s, their football picture library titles. So I wrote football stories for a few months, and then I went back and did my master's degree, then came out, started fiddling around with making films. But it was around 2002, I started selling stuff professionally. I was writing for Warhammer Monthly, for Games Workshop. And then I got some work at DC in the States. So I did Green Arrow, some Batman stuff. Some of it came out, some of it didn't. Bits and pieces for a while. I did various titles. And then I did a couple of little bits for Marvel. Worked for Panini here in the UK, doing Marvel UK stuff for a while. Then it led me to I was out of comics for a while. I was much more concentrated on the filmmaking, screenwriting. I had an agent. I was sort of thought, well, okay, that's maybe something that's I've done, and it's kind of come to an end. And then my daughter was born. I was she was about 2 or 3. I was a bit awake again. And I thought, comics would be quite good. I was clearing out the room that used to be my office, which is a bedroom, which I'm in now. I found a load of stuff that I'd written, and I hadn't really looked at any of it for a very long time. And I thought, well, maybe I can try that again. It's a good way of earning some extra money. And, and the thing about film, as you'd know, is, how long it takes to get anything going. So the immediacy of comics is something that's really great. So I kind of dipped a few toes into a few ponds, and I got some commissions, and then suddenly I was back doing it. And then probably that was about 2016, I think. And then I started working on Doctor Who for Titan Comics. And one of the reasons I was approached to work on it, and then I did work on it. And I was working with a lot of people from 2000 AD, like a lot of artists, people like Ian Colbard, who draws Brink, Rob Williams, Cy Spurrier. I think Al Ewing had moved on from Doctor Who at that point on the 11th Doctor. But yeah, and people like Nick Abadzis, who's a writer I'd really, whose work I was really interested in when I was younger. Still am, because Nick is a very good writer, an artist. So I kind of then thought, well, okay, it can't be a huge leap to go to 2000 AD, and 2000 AD is still published, and it's a weekly comic, and they need strips, and there's the magazine. And it kind of was that. I pitched a Future Shock and then was commissioned, and then I did another one, and then I did a thriller, which is a 3-part sort of thing, and then suddenly I had a series commissioned. And I've just finished that. I've been doing that for 5 years. That's just come to a conclusion. So always in the middle of coming to an end. And I had another series then that was in the magazine, which is just finished actually. which I did, which was so it's been I've been really kind of working on 2000 and the magazine for, I would say, seriously full on for 5 years. Yeah.
It's so interesting when you're talking about it, that how often the film and the comics sort of cross over or collide. And is there something sort of intrinsic as well in that in the sense that as a writer of comic strips, you're a script writer, and then an artist will take that over and interpret it, and as a writer of films, again, you're a script writer, and maybe a director will do it if you're not going to do it yourself.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of crossover between the disciplines, but they're also not maybe in the ways that you would think. I always say I did a few, obviously I said, if we sort of rewind, I went back to the late 90s. I'd done a few things for DC Thompson.
Right.
And then from there, comics was in a very bad place in the late 90s. It was very difficult. I mean, everything was contracting. From the late 80s, where it was kind of boom time, the late 90s were like desolation. And it really was that they weren't hiring people and there was a lot less opportunity. And as I said, I went back to university and I started kind of fiddling around with writing scripts, film scripts, short film scripts. And I made a short film. I think it was about 2001. So I did my master's. I did sort of like went through all that kind of process. Started thinking more about, writing. Was really out of comics for a while, and then like even buying comics. And then I did this. I got quite friendly with a guy at college who was doing it on the film degree, and we just decided to make a film. And I wrote a script, and we shot it. And I always say this, that the best writing class I ever took was a week in an edit suite with the crap I'd written. Because obviously you learn all the things about, the thing about writing is the way to do it is to do it, So I was very lucky. Long story how we got in there anyway. I had a week in an edit suite with an editor, and I really learned about velocity and pace, and when to enter a story, when to enter a scene, but not just when to enter a scene, but when to enter a story. Do you think is the beginning of your story really the beginning? Is this how you? And the kind of plasticity of editing and film. And we were at the dawn. This is DigiBeta, so this is the beginning of kind of like digital filmmaking, really, in a way that's affordable and kind of you can do something that's pretty good for no money, which is kind of what we did. And I learned. I don't think it's a surprise. I started working professionally as a writer probably within 9 months of doing that, and have never really stopped. So yeah, I think editorially, when you're writing comics, it's really important, because what you're doing is you're writing a script that an artist is going to make, an artist is going to visualize and turn into the story, the artwork that you're going to see. But in many ways, what you're doing is you're choosing the cuts. You're in the way that, you say, if you direct a film, it's shot by shot. In a way, in a script, what you're trying to do is you're imposing a kind of rhythmic structure on the piece. It's slightly different, obviously, because you're dealing in individual pages or spreads and stuff like that. So it's not completely the same discipline. But I think if you've got a sense of rhythm and a sense of editing, then you can write comics. You can learn to write comics. And the people who struggle with that don't.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of grammar, isn't there, that it's different for both, that you have to master.
Yeah, comic writing is a bit like songwriting in a way. You're kind of layering tracks. You're sort of like you're layering a visual track, and then there's a kind of like there's the structure of the page, which is kind of maybe this is a 12-bar thing, and then you're playing with the kind of dialogue and color and lots of different elements. It seems kind of odd, maybe to make that analogy, but I always think it is quite a bit like that. Or poetry as well. You're dealing with the rhythm of words and the rhythm of images as well. So it's kind of like having a sense of rhythm, I think, is crucial to it. And I think that's important when you make films as well. I think more than sort of the writing on the page, it's having a sense of rhythm when you come to cut it, and when you're shooting the scene with the actors, and having a sense of where the peaks and the troughs are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so interesting, you saying about the being in the editing suite and learning the most when you were there. One of my I've had so many formative experiences. It's
Haven't we all?
It's just right. But I mean, one of mine in terms of screenwriting, one of the most significant was I had a screenplay that we did like a page turn where you sit down with a producer and you go from page one all the way through the script, and they just give you notes on every single page, every single page and my sort of stereotypical view of producers was very much based on Barton Fink and that kind of big garrulous and ignorant sort of, and of course that's absolutely certainly in this case that was absolutely the opposite. This was a person who was cultured, absolutely knew how to tell a story, absolutely knew what they needed, had already produced several films, and was and just was asking loads of questions. Was just like, why do we need this? Why do we need this bit? We've had 4 scenes and they all take place in rooms. Is there any way we can get out of a room for one of these? And and it was just I remember after it took about 4 or 5 hours to just go through the whole script and do this, and afterwards I was just thinking, that is the best sort of that's like 3 weeks in some sort of writer's retreat or something, concentrated. Yep. and much more valuable because ultimately this person's paying me, so I'm getting a free course in screenwriting, plus I'm also being paid for it, so
you can't ask for more.
exactly
I upset someone. Earlier in the year I did a playwriting course, just after COVID and everything. I just wanted to sort of do something where I could write stuff and see it kind of acted out. I hadn't done that for a couple of years. Talking to one of the guys, when when everything was staged, they staged it up at the kind of, I was at Southwark Playhouse, they didn't leave it, and then we're in the bar afterwards, and one of the other writers was saying to me, "What is it you like most about writing?" And I said, "Getting paid." And I could see the shock on his face, and there was a part of him that was broken. I could see by the such a mercenary comment, but I think that's true. I do think there's a thing about you come up with an idea and you eventually con someone into giving you some money. It's a good measure of your writing. If someone's prepared to pay you for it, then you don't talk about these things enough, I don't think, as writers. It's
And I'll tell you why straight away. It's because it's a throwback to an elitist attitude in which writing was an aristocratic pursuit,
higher pursuit.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it was, people like Byron and people like Shelley and all the rest of it, romantic poets I really adore. But, the idea of this material stuff was an anathema to the creative muse and everything. I wouldn't claim to be working class anymore, but I'm from a working class background. Sodja, I've no landed wealth. I could only do this via being paid, and I think the same is true as well for film criticism. There's a real problem with the fact that we talk about access and diversity in the world of film criticism. Class is often ignored in that discussion, and one of the reasons all the people I meet at film festivals who are in their teens and their 20s and they're starting out, and I'm not knocking them, but the vast majority of them are only there because they have substantial wealth, financial support behind them. You don't find people who would be from my background in that same circumstance, or they have really good day jobs, but very few of them are there getting fully paid by the outlets that they're writing for.
Well, no, that's right. I think that's incredibly pertinent. The class thing is absolutely enormous. I mean, if you deal with the film industry in the UK in particular, I think one of the reasons why we don't make that many films that are, outstanding. There are lots of reasons why we do that, but I think a lot of the problem with it is that a lot of the things that are there are transplanted from other arts. So there's a lot of assumed knowledge from theatre, and which is not to say that you can't draw heavily from that. You can, but I think the language of theatre and the language of cinema are two totally different things in some respects. Go back to what we're talking about with the language of editing. I think if you don't really understand that, I'm not sure how you understand filmmaking. and what makes a good film, or what makes a film something that kind of comes alive on the screen, or something that you say, well, this is a wonderful, wonderful script, and then it's totally boring. Watch the film, and it isn't just about it isn't just about the editing. It's also going to be about the casting. It can be about the choice of director. It can be about loads of myriad different, creative choices. But I do think that some of that is kind of filtered through a very classist kind of lens. And I think one of the things working in comics is that's not true. Comics is a much more egalitarian kind of culture, because it was for so long a very junk culture. Comics has got a lot more in common with, say, the Hollywood of the past, I would say, than of the present. Because that's not so much true now, obviously, because your Marvels and your DCs are kind of absorbed into these giant multinational conglomerates. But certainly when I started working in comics across the pond, in particular in the States, when I went to DC, you still felt it was a publishing business that was based in New York. And that was a very different thing. And it was a publishing business based in New York that had its roots in kind of where we were where DC's offices were. I used to go and see my editor, was opposite the David Letterman Theatre. That it was a kind of showbiz, man. It's not about, it's not that. It's really not that. And you're as far away from Britain. There's a big world of difference between being there and seeing all those theatres, and seeing, being in, say, the West End and that kind of theatre experience. Maybe the two are kind of merged more over time. I'm talking about maybe 20 odd years ago.
Sure.
But a definite sense that it was, it's a much less, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, that idea, Whereas in London, I don't know, I think it's the biggest change I remember in London, I remember going to the Curzon. I used to go to the Curzon Soho a lot back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. Do you remember they used to do those Sunday morning double bills of they'd put together two kind of films from the 40s. I can remember going to see Red River and Terror in a Texas Town, which is a great kind of double bill if ever you want to see one, or things like that show kind of took maybe two Robert Altman films back to back, or a couple of Hitchcock films. Anyway, they used to show that, but it was very accessible. The sense of the culture was accessible, the cinema was accessible. This was something, it wasn't expensive. I think it was like £5 for 2 films, or £6, something like that. I can remember not going to the Curzon Soho for a long time, and I went to see something there. I can't remember what it was. Maybe about 2000, maybe around the time I'd had my daughter. It may even be a bit later, maybe about 2015. And I remember going to the cinema, watching the film, and all the adverts before were for luxury products. And it was the way that London had changed, the way that London had become more kind of much more exclusive. And the types of films that were being shown were much more exclusive. And I think that's a definite process that's occurred in the last 15 years, 10 years at least. And that was a bit of an eye-opener. I mean, and recently I went to a thing at the BFI. I mean, I used to go to BFI quite a lot, go to various events, and I'm sure you've been there. Not BFI, I'm talking about the BAFTA up at Piccadilly.
Oh, okay, right.
And in the BAFTA, you'd go to the theatre, or you'd see, I remember seeing James Cameron do a talk there just before Avatar came out. I saw Tarantino do a talk just before, maybe Inglourious Bastards or something had come out around that time, which was great. It was really, and then afterwards, everyone whoever they were, would go into the bar. I went to a thing about 2 months ago for It's a Sin. It was all to do with the TV BAFTAs. And we talk about it being kind of like the language of inclusivity within like that kind of world here in the UK. But it was the most exclusive thing I've ever been to. It was hideous. We were sort of like herded in up into a holding bar for 10 minutes, where you could buy a grossly overpriced drink, and then be kind of like herded into the theatre, and then you watched it for 50 minutes, and then you were herded out onto the street. And it was just totally kind of, very, very odd. Totally opposite of what it used to be, in my experience, and not very pleasant.
I have a friend, Massimo Benvenu, who told me once about the good old days of sort of going to film festivals and stuff. And he went to Venice for like 30, 40 years. No, not that long. 25, 30 years, I think. And he would say how he would walk into a hotel and see Peter Weir and just sit down and have a coffee with him and introduce himself and say, could I have, I'm thinking, I'm working on something, could I have an interview? And he'd say, I'm free Tuesday. And he'd get an interview with him. And I think he ended up writing a book about Peter Weir, actually. He certainly wrote you certainly had a long sort of ongoing relationship with him critically, and it was just like of course there was still publicists and all the rest of it, but nowadays, people get angry at you if you don't. If I mean, people want you to submit questions and things like that before you even go to the interview, and you have to sort of sign a thing that's saying where it's going to be published and everything. As a freelancer, I'm often like, I haven't got a clue where it's going to be published. I'm going to do the interview and I'm going to sell it if I can, But it's that sort of like there's a whole tranche of gatekeepers who are there, and they're not gatekeepers in the sense necessarily of, as I say, sort of diversity in terms of race or whatever. It's just like, but it's just funneling people off, I'm sure that there is an element of, if you are prejudiced, it gives you a perfect opportunity to use your power.
Sure it does. Yeah, no, you're right. I think the whole thing's far more mediated than it was before in lots of different ways. And I did write for a website for a while. Did a bit of film reviewing back around 2010 to 2012, 13.
What website was that?
I used to write for Den of Geek.
Oh right, yeah, Den of Geek.
Back when it was owned by Dennett. Back when Simon Brew was in charge of it. I wrote it for quite a long time, actually. I did quite a lot of round tables and stuff like that. I was just kind of interested in that. I was always very interested in film. It was another game. It was another way of kind of writing and just sort of stretching your a different set of muscles. I was asked recently to go and do a junket for something. I hadn't done one for years. It was the launch of one of the new Star Trek shows. It was one of the, I don't know why I was put forward for it, but there you go, I did it. And it was quite good fun, but it was totally it was an in-person one, and that was fine. Then they tried to get us to do another one for the launch of Paramount Plus, and I was invited to that. And I think the PRs there changed what we were going to be doing about 5-6 times, till the point it was like, you can come into London for an 8-minute interview with this person, and you can't see these people. You can only see this person, even though we've offered you both of these people at various points. You just thought, well, it's not worth it. It's like, do you want anyone to cover your thing?
Yeah. I don't know if sometimes they're just filling up a calendar or something. It just seems to be sometimes quite random.
Just bizarre.
Who you get and who gets pulled at the last minute and who turns up. And I understand certain situations are fluid, but it can be, you can end up feeling like you're not a journalist anymore, you're just a copywriter for a publicity machine, and it's just like, well, Absolutely. That's not what I signed on for, that's not what I want to do.
Well, it was obvious. I think when I was doing it, you could see it was like that. I can remember doing a round table with William Friedkin once, which was it's like, it's a round table, you really want to be interviewing it, but someone sort of tweeting before we went in, I've never seen a William Friedkin film. It'll be like, well,
get a different job then.
Exactly. It was just like, well, you're not really going to ask him anything interesting then, are you? I mean, it's but yeah, I mean, I've been to some good things, been to some bad things. One of the best interviews I ever did was with Rick McCallum, the producer of the Star Wars prequels, right? Because he was also Dennis Potter's producer, wasn't he? Before he went and worked for Lucas. I think that's how they met. They met on the set of Dream Child. He was making Dream Child in one room, one studio, tiny studio, and George Lucas was overseeing Return to Oz.
Right.
Because he'd been flown in as kind of to keep an eye on Walter Murch for the studio, and they kind of like bonded over that. And I met McCallum he was at a comic convention, actually. It was up at Business Design Centre. This was 2012. He was there, and I introduced myself. I said, I'm meant to be interviewing you in a couple of days. And I said, do you mind if I could ask you these types of questions? And he was like totally up for it. He said, because that's part of my history, And we got like a 90 minutes with him in his hotel, and it was a great interview. Really good. Very open, very kind of... And also you get him away from the stuff that he's promoting.
Yeah, I mean, that's often the secret, is if you can find a way of talking about something which isn't necessarily the stuff they want you to talk about, because they've been repeating it for last week to hundreds of different people in one form or another.
Yeah. The anecdote's worn down.
Yeah. So I also wanted to ask you about, this is a bit of what's the word, a pat question perhaps as a comic book writer and a film writer, where do you what do you think of? I've just come back as well from seeing Thor. Well, come back last night. I saw Thor, Love and Thunder. After sort of thinking I'm almost done with Marvel, I thought, okay, I'll give them one more go, and thought it was okay actually. I had absolutely no real.
I really liked it.
Yeah,
I thought it was better than okay actually.
Okay,
I thought it was
okay. Well, let's start there.
Yeah. So what do I think of the whole superhero comic?
Well, we could start with Thor and then move backwards.
Well, I really liked it. I mean, I was quite I'm less kind of enamored of Thor Ragnarok actually than a lot of other people. I mean, I enjoyed that when I saw it, but I didn't. I thought there were it was very lumpy and very kind of. I thought there was a Taika Waititi film sort of like fighting to get out of that, and there was like all this. I thought the stuff with Cate Blanchett in that film was very poorly done. I thought it was very kind of that was rote. That was very flat, very uninteresting. It was very poor. It was very dull in the way it was shot and everything else. But obviously the stuff with Chris Hemsworth being on the other planet and Tessa Thompson I liked a lot. So kind of for me, all the stuff that was good about the Ragnarok was in this, and I thought Christian Bale was miles better than her. Much better character, an interesting kind of character. I just thought it was a better film. I just thought it was better made. I thought the tone of it was more interesting. I thought the story was. I've read all this stuff about it being incoherent and everything. I don't agree with that at all. I thought it's very coherent. It's very clear. It's very set up in the first scene, and it kind of pays off at the end. And it's a fairy story. You have a childlike character narrating at the beginning. When it starts, let me tell you the story of Thor Odin's son. And it's like Hunt for the Wilder People. It's like a kind of fallible narrator, isn't it? If you use that kind of highfalutin term, which is so widely used now, it's not even highfalutin anymore. Such a cliche. But I thought it was really good. I thought it was really well done. I don't have a problem with it being funny. What are you trying to say? A film's too funny? Or not too many jokes? It's like, what? He's fucking God, for Christ's sake. It's like it doesn't. So I kind of. And for me, I think it's more like a Thor comic, the kind of Walt Simonson comics that I really liked as a kid and reread recently. The sort of joy of those kinds of things that doesn't, and I think it's a much smarter and it's a much more nimble and it's a much more funny, and it says some very interesting things. Like it's not a surprise that he kills Zeus, doesn't he? He sort of dethroned. It's the god becoming man. It's all that kind of. I liked it. I thought it was really, really good. I thought it was very. I've liked a lot more of the recent films than the early ones. I struggled with a lot of the earlier Marvel films, I have to say.
Right.
Because I felt they were too. You're not talking to the right person. I'm a comic book person. So I've read these characters. When they made Iron Man, when I was a little kid, I read that Ironmonger story, when I was 9, weekly in a kind of reprinted in British comics and then buy Marvel Iron Man comics on the stand from then. So, and when they replaced Captain America with kind of, the character in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I read those comics back in the day, So my view on it is obviously going to be different. And I like the first Iron Man film. I think it's okay. I don't see it as being a kind of masterpiece. I mean, if you compare it came out the same summer as The Dark Knight, didn't it? Yeah. And essentially, it's kind of Batman Begins, but it's nowhere near as good a piece of filmmaking as that. I can remember when Batman Begins came out. I remember going to see that. Obviously, I was a huge Batman fan. I'd started working for DC around that time. I thought that it was really good, except I knew that story so well.
Right.
For me, it wasn't kind of. Whereas I think. Yeah, and I think that was the thing when Marvel started doing what they were doing, and also 2008, that was the year The Dark Knight came out. I actually did some of the marketing work on The Dark Knight. I was for DC. I did some of the kind of product stuff that they did. They did a load of comic strips that were kind of. So I adapted the beginning of the film for a Blu-ray giveaway, the bank job. I wrote some original stuff around the film as well. So I read the script for The Dark Knight about 10 months before it came out. And I was really shocked at that. I was surprised when I read it. I thought, this is great.
Right.
But is it going to be successful?
Right.
Because it's so dark.
You saw the risk.
Oh yeah. And this, remember as well, Heath Ledger was alive when I read it as well. Yeah, I think people forget how much that played into the kind of the thing around the film, making it a big event as well. I mean, and it wasn't successful because of the event, although that didn't hurt it. It was really bloody good as well. It's kind of like, so it's really strange when I saw The Dark Knight. I saw The Dark Knight having read the script. It was like and turn. So it was kind of very interesting to watch it from that point of view. So my view, I mean, so I don't know where we are in terms of the thing of it. So my point is that sort of, I thought he did something really kind of new in 2008, because I went on and worked on Dark Knight, and I liked Batman Begins, but I just thought, well, I'm Batmaned out. And he did something different with that. They took it somewhere different. And I like the second one as well, The Dark Knight Rises. I think that's, I think for me, those two are the better films of the trilogy, in terms of the filmmaking, in terms of the scale, in terms of what you're paying off that you've set up earlier on. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but that's my personal feeling on the thing. And the way he made that film was totally different from the way these films had been made before. So I just, in 2008, certainly that first, when you compare the ambition of Ang Lee's Hulk movie to the Incredible Hulk that came out that year, Ang Lee's Hulk is a very flawed film, but it's an ambitious film, and it's cinema. It's truly cinematic.
Right.
It may get things wrong, I think, it may not be completely successful, but the ambition in that film from a world-class filmmaker is huge. And then you see the Incredible Hulk, which I don't think is a great film. No. By anyone's definition. It's not a great popcorn movie. It's so good they replaced the lead actor when they made the Avengers. It's kind of all those sorts of things. So I was kind of down on, I wasn't that interested in them. I liked I liked Thor and Captain America more when they came along, because I thought they were more risky to get right. And Thor is basically Superman 2, because I've watched it recently. Captain America is kind of, it's sort of a bit Hellboy in there, a bit of.
I remember feeling it was a bit Raiders as well. They had a sort of like, the period detail, the feel of.
Yes, no, Hellboy's quite Raiders as well. It's kind of got a certain. Yeah, there's a lot of that in there, isn't there? But it's really, and Joe Johnson, obviously, the Lucasfilm thing is a strong kind of link. So I kind of thought those ones were kind of okay. I like the first Avengers film, but it's not very challenging. It's kind of, I always said at the time, it's the most expensive kind of TV movie ever made. It's kind of, I like, we watched it recently. We're watching them all with my daughter, who's nearly 9, because she's been coming watching it all. And those ones are really enjoyable. But I just think for me, where Marvel kind of clicked into gear and went up a notch was made Civil War. Right. Because I think then they stopped being so meek. And obviously there was big change over the film properties. And I just think then when you see them, when they bring in Spider-Man, when they're bringing in kind of Captain America, and they're kind of dealing with like the Iron Man thing as a kind of, that's the first big sort of mashup. That's really where you start saying this. And I meant that bit where they fight at the airport is like, well, that is a comic book. Even more than the Avengers or the Avengers Age of Ultron. This is what, if you read comic books, this is what it is. This is exactly the kind of that sense of wonder and kind of stupidity, and it's joyously mad and all the rest of it. So for me, that's from then. And I've liked. I haven't seen the Eternals. I haven't seen Shang-Chi because I didn't get to see them at the time, and I haven't got round to watching them on thing. I've sort of seen everyone else, and I like the later ones because I think they're kind of madder. I think they're more like they're the kinds of things I would have, I liked when I was young. But then I'm a 8-year-old boy really at heart. So,
aren't we all?
Aren't we all? But that's kind of my feeling on them. I don't know. I don't know what that.
No, I mean,
if that makes any sense.
It's absolutely coherent. And I guess I would cross over with you on several. I mean, I guess there are several things I would dispute, and there are other things that I would wholeheartedly agree with. I think the Nolan Batmans absolutely, because I mean, I was there for the Tim Burton Batmans and for the hype and for the huge sort of, you know, it's difficult to explain to people how that kind of publicity had never been there before. You know, that kind of
no.
I remember seeing like Batman posters on like bus stops for the first time. I was like, no one put movie posters on bus stops before. You know,
you were living in, so you grew up in the Northwest. So did you ever see the cover of Time Out that they did? They did a Time Out.
No.
I don't know if Time Out were doing like city editions at that point.
No,
Time Out in London.
It was just London then.
Yeah, so this was maybe 6 to 9 months before it came out. They did a cover of Time Out, which was the Batman logo, the poster. And it was the first time you'd seen pictures from that. And there weren't even that many pictures. They were really crap as well. They were like aerial shots of Batman, a bit shot of Jack Nicholson. And there was an article about it. And it was like, you could tell that was a big stage change and was kind of happening. But you're right. I mean, the way the film was marketed is kind of like it was totally unlike anything ever before. Unique.
And so, and yet, you know, the Batman film, I went to see it, I enjoyed it, I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was, you know, I didn't think it was anything that special. I mean, I don't think this is a controversial opinion. I really enjoyed the sequel kind of more. And I've always been a comic book guy for Warlord Battle 2000 AD, and obviously when I was younger, Whizzering Chips and Beano. I never liked the dandy. Not a dandy man.
No.
And but I was not American comics. I just didn't have any. I don't even think I had access to. I'm not even sure if I. But certainly, neither me nor any of my friends read Marvel or DC particularly. So I actually started reading comic books as graphic novels with that first sort of wave of the Killing Joke and the Dark Knight. And, so in a way, it was sort of like I was reading the stuff that was subverting a lot of the stuff that I hadn't read, you know, or I hadn't seen. So when I saw Nolan's Batman Begins, I was just blown away by it. I just thought this is amazing. This is totally. I did think that. And this will be a consistent complaint with many, not just comic book movies, but action movies general, that the sort of last act is just like, okay, you're just blowing shit up now. I do think that is a consistent problem that action cinema has. The sense of you've got to accumulate and you know, and at a certain point, you know, if I fall off a building. Yeah, if I jump out of the window of my bedroom, I've got, 6 meters to fall, and I know what that will feel like. That will feel very painful. Okay. But if I jump off the top of the Empire State Building or I jump out of an airplane, you know, there's no way I can relate to that. So, and so it has a similar thing with the Batman movies with action movies. Once you get past, and James Bond is another one. Once you get past a certain level of jeopardy and danger, it's just like, well, it doesn't relate whatsoever. I loved Dark Knight, as did everyone. I really Dark Knight Rises is a hill I'll die on, saying that is a fantastic movie and a wonderful conclusion.
Yeah. No,
I thought it was an opera. I just thought there was this, you know, that jail and everything. It's just opera. It's like I've seen Verdi operas staged in that same grandiose style. And I thought a lot of and this is where sort of the geekdom of criticism, you know, the criticism became sort of something that geeks did more. Den of Geek, there you go, it's right. It's in the name. There was this sort of like misunderstanding of what criticism is, where your job is not to be the scriptwriter. Your job is not to look at potential sort of what do you mean he blew it up when how far could he go and the time doesn't work, and it's just like That's not how stories work. That kind of,
No.
You've believed that you're people nitpicking, but surely the army would do something at this point. You're nitpicking stuff, and the premise of the film is a vigilante who dresses up as a bat and beats up criminals.
Exactly.
If you're not willing to enter into the universe with the same, the willing suspension of disbelief, then there's no point you even watching this. You're not watching the same film as I am.
But also as well, you're not watching. I think the geek kind of thing as well is how much cinema is there in the kind of the framework of what they're talking about as well. And it's obvious you watch the Nolan films. He's drawing on, he's on a very obvious level. People will say Heat, but he's very much drawing on the films of like James Cameron. Even the palette of a lot of the stuff. Cameron, Ridley Scott, there's people talk about Kubrick. I think that's less true of the Batman films. I think that's definitely Bond. I mean, absolutely Bond. That whole Batmobile chase in the first film is the tank chase from GoldenEye. He's even got the same costume designer for Bruce Wayne's clothes as designed Bond's outfits during the 90s and the first and Casino Royale. It's Lindy Hemming, isn't it? So it's that's not by design. That's not by accident either. It's so there's a but then when you get into kind of like the last one, you're seeing kind of there's lots of connections to other types of literary sources and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, people, most of the viewers, with the best will in the world online, and I'm not saying that needs to be. I think also as well, you can kind of say, that stuff doesn't matter if you're watching the film. But actually, in a way, it does matter because actually those things have been put in the film for a reason. So this is the thing with Love and Thunder that I think is really good, is I think that film has got a lot of stuff in it that's really interesting. It's like, for me, it was more like watching Terry Gilliam do a superhero movie. Then it's got a lot of that. It's got a lot of Baron Munchausen. It's got a lot of that type of filmmaking kind of right at the heart of it. I just didn't realize he was attached to Time Bandits, which makes perfect sense. That's kind of that's exactly. So it kind of and Flash Gordon, the Mike Hodges Flash Gordon is kind of those types of things, and those are clear kind of touch points for it. It's kind of so I don't know. I think I don't want to kind of sort of like bash the type of criticism, the type of reactions that there are, but a lot of it is spectacularly ill-informed, and also not just spectacularly informed, but also spectacularly kind of like so subjective as the notion of objectivity in the way that you can.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot. We charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Assess a piece of entertainment or popular art, or however you want to describe it. It seems to be kind of pushed to the. That's not even part of the equation. It's all about subjective responses, and sometimes your subjective response can be wrong.
Yes.
We've all done that.
Yeah.
We do that every day.
The least interesting part of any review is does somebody like something or not? I used to have a mate who I still have a mate, Elliot. He's a great mate, but he would he was like Twitter before Twitter, because he'd say, "What was the film like last night?" And you'd go, "Well, it was," and he went, "You hated it, didn't you?" And it was like, no, I didn't. But there are so many different gradations of how I could react to it. And I'm often baffled. I'm often confused. So I'm often watching things going, I sort of think this and I sort of think that. And I change my mind a lot. I change my mind all the time. Yeah. So, for instance, just talking to you about Love and Thunder makes me want to watch it again. Because I've
actually seen it again. I saw it with my daughter on Saturday. I twice, and I thought the second time it was any like little niggles, like little plot things that I noticed. It's a film that rewards rewatching, which to me is always the sign of a good movie. And I think if you've got kind of insane reactions like Mark Commode, what he's kind of rant about it the other day. If people are doing rants about something, then there's probably something there.
What was his rant? I didn't hear about that.
Oh, it was disgusting. It was terrible. It was incoherent. It wasn't funny. It was no laugh out loud. Simon Mayo was kind of definitely didn't agree with him on the thing they were watching. It was bizarre. It was just bizarre. I've heard it from a few other people as well. It's like that. I think it's sensibility, isn't it, as well? It's like if you, I don't know. I mean, you pay your money, you take your choice. But I can remember Mark Commode famously saying that he hated Blue Velvet the first time he saw it and walked out and said it was a disgusting, disgraceful film, and now he thinks it's a masterpiece.
Yeah. And he doesn't get Big Lebowski at all, apparently. That was another of his lacunae.
Well, there you go. What can you say?
I mean, I'm not going to bash Mark Commode, but at the same time...
but I think he's interesting. He's the most kind of like, this is out there. He's making big, it's out there on YouTube. They're highlighting it. Mark's rant against Love and Thunder. He wants to draw attention a bit. So,
It just that idea that there's such a thing as a rant as well. That's like a critical. I mean, this is a guy who wrote a book called Hatchet Job, but that you. It begins to think that the criticism itself or the critic is becoming sort of self-serving. Of like, okay, I haven't done a rant all year. I need a couple of rants to,
Whereas I think, I don't know what your view on it is, but for me, a film I could rant about all day long is Top Gun. Maverick. It's a disgusting film. It's a despicable piece of work. It's kind of fascist propaganda. It's like it hasn't even got the courage to name the enemy in the film.
No.
And it hides behind a kind of this is an artistic conceit. And it's like, no, it's not. It's because you want to sell this film in China. It's because you want to sell this film in Russia. Obviously you can't, but you made it 2 years ago when you were trying to do that. Yeah. And that for me is there's nothing destructive or nasty at the heart of Thor: Love and Thunder. If we're going to just wrap it back to what we're talking about here, but Top Gun Maverick is based on despicable material. What can I say?
Oh yeah. The only thing I would dispute there is I agree there are commercial considerations for not naming the enemy. But I also think that's like that's part of its fascism. It's like it doesn't really matter who you fight as long as you fight. Fighting is the thing. You just have to fight. And I'm not sure if it's George Orwell. I think it was George Orwell who said something like, it doesn't matter how well you build a wall. It makes a difference if it's around a garden or a concentration camp. So you could look at Top Gun and I could say technically it does this really, really well, but it's a
phenomenally technically fantastically made film. Some of the best sound editing I've seen in a film for a long time. It's edited phenomenally well. On a technical level, I'm not going to kind of knock it. It's technically very good.
In the service of a sort of Reaganite militaristic philosophy.
So's Birth of a Nation.
Yeah.
That's technically probably the most influential movie of all time, and it's despicable.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think it's interesting we're going off topic, but Top Gun's a far more ludicrous superhero movie than any other superhero movie. It's just ridiculous. It's just absolutely, and it's not ridiculous. It's ridiculous to say, oh, that's part of its charm, isn't it? It's like, well, you're dealing in real things here. That's not part of its charm. I just think it's. I just watched that film and I look at it as a failure of the human imagination. And that is, somewhat that can be my rant. That'll be that. But I look at it and I look at the think back to the last Mission Impossible film, which I really disliked as well, and I'd quite liked the previous one, Rogue Nation. I thought that one was quite a bit more nimble. It was a bit more fun. They were in that era where they were kind of like, to rehabilitate Tom Cruise, they were kind of like deconstructing his image and being quite funny. Things like, what's the Doug Liman one? Edge of Tomorrow was called, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That one, if you don't like Tom Cruise in that, you can watch him die hundreds of times. There's kind of an element of that, and the character's an idiot. And I quite liked American Made. I thought that was quite well done.
I liked Oblivion, the science fiction.
I haven't seen Oblivion. A lot of people say it's pretty good.
It's well worth a watch. It's the same director as Top Gun Maverick, I think.
Yeah, Kaczynski, isn't it? Yes, but Fallout, Mission Impossible Fallout, I thought was just flaccid. And when they said, "Oh, we had a 27-page script," it's like, well, you could tell. It just goes, it's like lumbers from set piece to set piece to set piece. It's like totally overdone in terms of its filmmaking. And then it has that horrible thing at the end where it's like, only you, Ethan, the lone hero can save this world, and all that. And it's like, oh no, we're back into that territory. And it doesn't surprise me that Top Gun Maverick is the same. It's like we've gone away. We've rehabilitated Tom now. We can kind of just go back into all this kind of neocon fantasy again.
And feeding the ego, especially because Mission Impossible was always about the team. It was always about, there's a team with loads of individual pieces that are moving, and then they've made it into sort of the American James Bond, essentially, without any of James Bond's kind of charm. I mean, I like James Bond. I'm a big James Bond fan.
Me too, yeah.
And the Daniel Craig movies are often sort of compared unfavorably to the Mission Impossible films, just in terms of the action set pieces have got better and better with Mission Impossible, and the James Bond ones are sort of struggling to keep up. But I think the James Bond films, they're kind of
I don't watch them. Sorry.
They're kind of about stuff. It's like you said about, they're fantasies, yes, all the rest of it, but they do sort of ping against bits of the real world in a way that the Mission Impossible movies don't, or certainly don't in a way that sounds right.
Well, no, you watch a film like Skyfall. Skyfall's a great popcorn movie. It's a great popcorn movie. It's a huge success. There's a reason it was a huge success, because it's very good. But also, as well, the person making it understands the fantasy that he's unpacking. Sam Mendes did a really great job in that film of like kind of, where do you place Bond? I mean, the whole thing at the end is like, it's like John Buchan, in 39 Steps, when he's out there on the kind of moors and everything, you're in kind of Heathcliff territory, aren't you? You're kind of like, it's all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of that that's all kind of bubbling away. You've got the stuff about decoding Bond's sexuality in the middle, as done as a throwaway gag. That's all it's all done very lightly, but it's done very, very cleverly, and it's got real impact. I think the Bond film, in those films, there's I suppose people would say there are two great Daniel Craig Bond films, which are Casino Royale and Skyfall, and the others are varying degrees of hit and miss, maybe. I quite enjoyed Spectre. I think Spectre's as a kind of it's got problems, obviously, but as a kind of big picture Bond movie, I vastly prefer that to No Time to Die. I thought No Time to Die is my least favourite of all of them.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I'm much warmer on Spectre than I was. I rewatched it quite recently. I think maybe a year ago, rewatched all of them together, and I didn't. Again, it was kind of, there was a critical sort of backlash. There was sort of it was released in England first, and all the English critics went 5 stars. He's back. It's amazing. And then it was released in the States, and the States critics went, "What are you guys smoking? This is nowhere near as good as Skyfall." And I think that neither of those were true, and somewhere in between, it was the correct sort of evaluation. I really rate Quantum of Solace, and I know that's got a lot of technical problems to do with its, the writer's strike and the script not being there or anything. But
it's about something.
It's about something, and it's a 90-minute sort of punk song. It's like if you did Bond as a punk movie, and the editing is crazy and kind of shouldn't work, but at a certain point, I think that really richly rewards a reviewing, just because the first time you're watching it, you can't follow it. And the second time you're watching it, you're going, no, I know the story, crack on,
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the more underrated Bond movies because it's kind of it's a bit of an outlier in some respects. I mean, it works better as a kind of sort of addendum to Casino Royale. But it's a much better looking film than Casino Royale. The look of all the Bond movies after that owe a debt to Quantum of Solace. The texture and style and tone and the way they approach the filmmaking, Casino Royale, I think actually is quite a. I know everyone talks about they should bring back Martin Campbell. For me, Martin Campbell's best Bond film is Golden.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Casino Royale is very good, but I think it is also very flawed. And my flaws, the flaws I thought were there when I saw it the first time, I've there all the way through. And you take an hour to introduce the love of his life and he has no chemistry with her, then it's a problem for a love story. And at the beginning, it's kind of a very generic action movie, I think but it's got enough interesting stuff and it plays with the character enough and it does things. He's great in it. Judi Dench is great in it. I think the loss of Judi Dench after Skyfall is the biggest problem with the subsequent Bond films, actually. In my view, there's something that was just never replaced in those films that after she was.
It feels like a backward move to go with a bloke. I know that's. I mean, Ray Fiennes is great, and I really No Time to Die, one of my favourite scenes in any of the Craig Bond films of acting. I mean, I love these. I love tiny little line readings and things which really hit well. Is when Ray Fiennes has a drink and Craig says, "God, you're thirsty," and I just think, wow, that is such especially Bond the alcoholic having a go at the boss for drinking on duty.
Well, I like all the stuff in Spectre where you spend all the time with kind of him and. Q and Moneypenny. I think all that's they haven't really ever done that in a Bond film before, and that's why I think that gives it a really different flavour, and they kind of blend that all together. I think the final act of Spectre is really good. I think it's kind of of course it's daft, but it's like it kind of you come back to London, it works, and it kind of works as a lovely little flip to Skyfall because you've got in that you go to the countryside, you go back in time, and at the end of that one you go back to the city, you go right back to kind of where we are. Now, there's the ancestral home is burnt at the end of that one, and then the work home is being demolished at the end of that one. And I just think they kind of juggle all those different characters in that final act is very, very effective. And I thought much more effective than the final act in No Time to Die. But then again, I thought the ending of Spectre was kind of the perfect way to leave it. In lots of ways. I just think No Time to Die looks like one. That's just the one where they can't really bring themselves to kind of reboot the thing. And they've got a real big kind of like financial kind of stake in Daniel Craig carrying on because they know it works. And then so they kind of do it. But I thought that was the time to redo it. I think that was the time. I think when No Time to Die came out, it just felt old. I just think it felt like that was a story we didn't really need or care, and I don't really think it's resonated. Like we're now sort of like nearly a year after it came out.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, he's retiring again. Is he retired? I mean, he spent more films retired than he spent actually being secret agent. Which I mean it's. But okay, one thing I wanted to ask about the comic book movies as well. And I mean, I guess we're talking about franchises in Hollywood generally. Well, it's not. But one of the things, rather than any individual sort of comic book movie, I think the biggest criticism people sort of have is just the fatigue with it being such dominating so much sort of Hollywood output in terms of action cinema at the moment, and for the past, decade and a half, I guess, going back to the Marvels, because I do see the Nolan films as a sort of I mean, that's where the Nolan films have this sort of difference. Is not just the filmmaking, and it's specifically very much a Nolan eye and all the rest of it, but there is a story with a beginning and a middle and end, and it finishes. And then you get the other sort of, and it feels like it's an ongoing saga that just I don't know, it's just getting to the point where often people talk about television being cinematic now in terms of the quality and in terms of the ambition, but it's almost like cinema has become TV again, gone back to sort of Flash Gordon serials, where you're watching something that depends on you already knowing 5 or 6 films. How do you stand with that as a comic book aficionado, as well as a lover of cinema?
What do I think about it? I mean, I think the thing you have to say is the reason. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about Marvel, aren't we?
Mainly, yeah. I mean, a little bit DC. I mean, Morbius has come out recently. Venom has come out.
You can make a point about DC is that they haven't done it very well. I mean, and I think in some respects that's because I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of their characters, because the DC characters, you said you kind of came to it when you read Killer Joke and all the rest of it. The best DC films, the most successful films based on DC properties, and I remember Chris Nolan saying this about Batman when he did it, that you keep Batman and Superman separate because there's a kind of lot of iconic power in those characters. You don't need to have that. Well, the truth is that the kind of idea of continuity is a Marvel thing. DC always did. There was a bit of Batman and Superman that would be world's finest in the past, but they worked because they were kept separate. Batman would have his own kind of adventures, and there's a kind of Batman family of characters. Superman would have his own adventures. They might team up in the Justice League, but that would be kind of very much its own sealed little world. If you look at the success of Joker or something like that, that's like a kind of graphic novel. Well, there was a graphic novel by Brian Azzarello and Lee Behemo, I think, sort of 15 years ago, around the time The Dark Knight came out. And that's a big influence on that film, I should say. I think keeping those characters on their own is where they're at their best. I don't think mixing them together, it works. They're very different characters. They're also very kind of, they're like fairy story characters in a way. Superman is, he's Moses with a bit of, he's a science fiction version of that kind of story. Batman is a bit Zorro, he's a bit Count of Monte Cristo. There's all this kind of elements to Batman that are there that you can sort of play with. Wonder Woman is her own thing. Wonder Woman was successful because it was set in a different time period. It didn't really impinge on anything else, did it? Aquaman didn't really impinge on anything else. They're much more powerful when you keep them separate. Whereas I think the Marvel comics are, by definition, have always been defined by the fact they work together. The first issue of Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man, is a team up with the Fantastic Four. So right back to the 60s. This is not something that. This is the thing I think when you watch the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans, which I think the first two in particular are very good. You always felt in those films there was something missing. They were like the Keaton Batman films, but Spider-Man exists in a world where there are other superheroes. That's less true in the X-Men films, because obviously the X-Men kind of interconnect with their own massive cast of characters. But then when you get to I think the failure of all those other Marvel films is because they tried to do that kind of standalone thing, like Daredevil, Elektra. I mean, these are not good films. The Incredible Hulk, the original Ang Lee Hulk. Kind of Hulk should operate in a world where there are other characters. If you're going to do that kind of version of the character, I think the Marvel thing is because they're true to what the source material is. And across the kind of 30 odd movies, the hit rate is really high. The most that are less successful are still entertaining. They haven't really made what you'd call an out and out kind of Turkey. Even films I didn't like the first time I saw them, like I sort of watching with my daughter, I watched the Thor: The Dark World, which is a film I'd kind of sort of like put away as kind of like, oh, don't want to watch that again. You know, so watch that with her. And I was kind of pleasantly surprised. There were bits in it that are quite funny. There were bits in it. It's not the best film by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of like, you know, there are far worse movies than that are out there. And yet you can also see why they then went in a completely different direction when they brought in Taika to do, you know, Thor Ragnarok. But I would say their success is their success. Other people's failure is their, I mean, and it's not just DC. I mean, DC has been successful. I think this is the other thing that should also be kind of, that is overlooked in this kind of like, Marvel is a huge success, DC's not. I mean, Joker did $1 billion. Wonder Woman did nearly $1 billion. Aquaman, which was a joke character in, you know, Entourage, did $1 billion, you know? Batman versus Superman did nearly $900 million. You know, when you add all that together, Suicide Squad, the first one, not the second one. So these films have not been unsuccessful. These films have been successful by any kind of business metric. What they haven't had is the kind of cultural kind of success. They haven't had the kind of the ability to kind of like really capture something. And that's the thing that Marvel movies have done. They have captured something. Whether they will continue to capture something, well, everything ends, doesn't it? All tastes change, time moves on. But if you look at the kind of landscape of cinema, I think it's more to do with the point is that Disney, and then obviously Marvel before they were bought by Disney, have created something that works. And everyone else has tried to move into doing something similar. So whether that's Universal with their failed kind of monster movies or any of those other things. No, even Star Wars is a really good example. You know, the attempt to try and turn Star Wars into this kind of like wide-ranging, multi kind of spoked, multi-transmedia kind of franchise. You know, considering how successful and how well known Star Wars is, they've done a really because they don't have. I think the thing with Marvel is whatever you say, think about them, is they've all got the characters to spoke off into these different things. You know, Thor: Love and Thunder is, what is it? It's kind of an Avengers sequel. Is it kind of a Thor sequel? It's got a bit of Guardians of the Galaxy in there. They're a huge part of their own franchise. You know, they've got their own series of films which are hugely popular. No one else has got that. And I mean, I think in terms of the broader kind of way that studios have approached, if you want to talk about action cinema, well, what action cinema is there? Who's making it? You know, Fast and Furious. Well, you can't exactly say that Fast and Furious is different to the Marvel movies in a way, because they're just kind of doing their kind of version of that, or the Bond franchise. You know, I mean, I think that the Marvel films, at least they have some character to them. I think in Top Gun and Mission Impossible, there's no character. Everyone, you know, sort of says, oh, it's, you know, Mission Impossible, that Fallout or whatever, or Top Gun Maverick is up there with kind of Mad Max Fury Road. Is it?
No.
I don't see it.
Not for. I mean, Mad Max Fury Road sticks out like a
sore thumb.
If a sore thumb was an indicator of great quality, you know, I mean, and there you could sort of come back and say, hey, wait a minute, that in itself is the fourth entry of a franchise, but with such a gap between the third and the fourth as to basically at that point it becomes an original thing of its own. I think I didn't sit down watching it as chapter 4 of the Mad Max story. It was just like,
well, it's kind of a reboot of Mad Max in a way. Exactly. I mean, you can't. But then again, every Mad Max film is.
Yes.
You don't really have any kind of continuity. They're a bit more like James Bond in that respect. It's like the classic James Bond. It was like,
between 1 and 2, they kind of skip genres as well. Like, you know, Mad Max 1 is kind of like a revenge drama set 20 minutes in the future. And Mad Max 2 is like, there was a nuclear war or something? It's, post-apocalyptic war movie, you know.
Oh, totally different. And then Mad Max 3 is completely different again. I mean, it's, I think, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if you look at the state of action movies, I mean, you know, who else is making action movies? I mean, James Cameron every 10 years, 12 years.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Chris Nolan, Dunkirk is an action movie.
Yeah, Tenet as well is another sort of.
Tenet.
I mean, even Spielberg. You got Ready Player One is definitely. I think it's definitely an action movie. I don't see what.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of other examples in more recently. I
think the problem maybe is just the dominance of action cinema over every.
I don't think it's the dominance of action cinema. I think it's the dominance of fantasy.
Yeah,
I think that's the thing, is that we're not talking about action cinema like Bond movies or I think one of the things that people like about Top Gun is it's very simple and in a relatable world. They don't have to. There is that thing about not having to know. And I suspect Top Gun's played much better with older audiences, going to the cinema, going back to the cinema. I think you talk about needing to know other stuff, about interconnectivity and all the rest of it, or watching a bunch of Disney Plus shows or whatever else. I think for the younger audience, that's not really an issue, because I think they're constantly in a kind of information soup through their phones and devices. So I was talking to my little one this morning, she went before sports day. And she was saying to me, no, maybe we're talking last night. She was up late. And she was saying to me, so who's Emmanuel? I was reading about Emmanuel Macron on my phone. It's like, he's the president of France, isn't he? So, yeah. And I said, so you know about him? She goes, yeah. And then there was this thing about George Floyd. And, so it just went off on this kind of, there was no context necessarily to this. But she's 8, nearly 9. And she has a phone that doesn't really work. But she can kind of browse things, go on Google and see stuff through kind of newsreel, which is her default source of news, which is, I think, quite and should be encouraged. Sure. She can pick all that up. So, if the kids are going to go see it on their own, we talk about kids going to see these things on their own, the 13, 14, 15, which is primarily the audience that is going to see this stuff. I think that they are well ahead of that. They can do their research, that's what they do. Yeah. They can go on, they can watch a YouTube catch up, of stuff. Yeah. I think the thing is that media exists in many different forms. I think the interesting thing is, I think the kind of the precursor to this was what the Wachowskis were trying to do with the Matrix sequels, because what they did then was well ahead of the curve, and the audience just weren't literate enough in technology. They weren't literate enough in all of those. You look at everything that's happened subsequently. They did the Animatrix, they did all those comic books, they did the video game, they did the game afterwards that kind of had this whole kind of like dramatic surround that all kind of fed into those sequels. So it was a concept in a way, that whole transmedia idea. I think if you look at it, they were doing that in 2003, where we were just watching X-Men 2. Right. Majority of them were going to see that. And I rewatched that the weekend, X-Men 2, and I think it stands up really, really well. But it looks like a kind of film from another era. It looks like when you watch GoldenEye or something like that, it's got a kind of grungier, kind of more thrillerish aesthetic. It's quite moderate in terms of its visual effects and stuff. That final act in the dam and everything, there's loads of stuff going on and all that. But it's not spectacle. In the same way. It's not just kind of empty spectacle. It's spectacle and effects and everything built around a kind of giant sort of set piece, and everything's moving that around. So it's quite modest in its sort of what it was trying to do. But I think that what they did in those films, actually those Matrix movies, doesn't really get kind of discussed enough, because in terms of the idea of a kind of world and an idea of a fantasy world, that's kind of, it embodies cyberpunk and superheroes and kind of, some sort of theological kind of stuff that's going on. There's a whole range of stuff at work in there that's kind of far more ambitious than a lot of films today, let's be perfectly honest. But the whole thing about the audience having these different access points through different media, they were pre kind of like the ubiquity of like super fast broadband and smartphones. If the smartphone revolution had happened and those films came out, then maybe that would have had a different effect. But I think what they did then is that's the kind of root of a lot of the stuff that we're looking at, because what they were doing was they were comic book movie fans. They were comic book fans. They worked in comics before they worked in cinema. So a lot of what they were doing was transplanting all that to the mainstream, but they did it far earlier than anyone else really had even sort of tried to do it. I think George Lucas was kind of toying with this. I mean, it's interesting if you remember, go back to when I interviewed Rick McCallum all those years ago, they were working on that Star Wars TV show at that point, the one that never happened. And the idea then would be that you would do 150 or 50, hundreds of episodes or whatever, and it would be kind of and he was saying, well, no network will pay for it. They were ahead of the time in terms of what they were trying to do, but essentially what they were trying to do was streaming before then, and to kind of expand it out into these different other kind of media and platforms. So, I mean, I think there have been attempts in the past to do it, but they haven't been the right property and it hasn't been the right time. And Marvel is the thing where it just hit. And I don't think you can underestimate with Marvel. It'd be interesting what would the situation be with Marvel if they hadn't been bought by Disney. I don't think the Avengers would have made $1.5 billion because you then got the full marketing might of the Disney corporation behind you. You know, all the vertical integration that comes with that, all the kind of stuff. You've got the theme parks, you've got the stores, you've got all that kind of, you know, that's where Marvel was dominated because of having Disney as the kind of the backstop behind it. And it's obviously pushed Disney on to even more success, full stop. So I think but everything ends.
Apropos, I mean, cinema always seems to be lagging about 30, 40, 50 years behind itself, in the sense that, you know, when cinema, first sort of bursts on the scene, you've got like one of the dominant genres is westerns, and westerns are all based on within living memory. You're within 50, 60 years of the invention of cinema is when most westerns are being set, and there's a whole bunch of novels that start to get made into films nowadays. You know, of all those properties, only The Matrix was an original property. You know, everything else, I mean, and including James Bond here and Top Gun, Mad Max, obviously, but all the Avengers, all the Marvel, all the DC are all based.
Star Wars, I guess, as well, would be the other one, wouldn't it? Star Wars.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely. And it just comes to a point where you think, okay, if the new George Lucas, you know, is there space for them to sort of put in there? Is there space for Raiders of the Lost Ark? Is there space for a new idea? Like, I mean, Ghostbusters, I remember loving that because it was a new idea. It's like, wow, what a great idea that is. And you didn't expect to necessarily live with that idea as a TV series and 5 different films. You know, what was Dan Harmon from Community would always say, 5 seasons in a movie, you know. You wouldn't necessarily get that extrapolation. But I just wonder, okay, fair enough. Have your 5 seasons in a movie, but can we have some new source material?
Yeah, well, I think that's the trouble, isn't it? It's like, where is that stuff coming from? Some of it's from, you know, there are comic books that people are adapting. You know, I think the problem, it reflects more poorly on the fact that cinema in general. I mean, I think if you look at Alan Ladd had to take the punt on George Lucas to kind of make Star Wars. You know. I think there's always, I think generally speaking, the culture has become more corporatized and kind of more franchised. I mean, you just look at the way this works with books. I mean, I think we haven't talked about, I think the big thing for Marvel, the big precursor to Marvel is Harry Potter. Because that broke the mold of the fact that you made 3 films, didn't you, in the past? It was always like, there's a trilogy, you know, that's why there's a Dark Knight trilogy, there's a Lord of the Rings trilogy, there's a Star Wars trilogy. That's what you do. But Harry Potter was like, we're spread over 7 books, and we're going to make all those books, and we're going to kind of all those kids, and we're going to do it like you say, like a TV show in a way over that decade.
Absolutely.
And it gives the corporation years of staking their claim. I mean, and the big change in culture. I mean, we go back to 2008. I think that's the big change, because obviously Iron Man is a big hit for Marvel. The idea is they're going to make these kind of other films that all join together to the Avengers, which looks like this ridiculously ambitious, but looks incredibly modest when we look at it now. But the success of The Dark Knight, don't underestimate that. $1 billion, that changed DC Comics. That changed the way Warner Brothers thought about DC. That changed the way that they wanted to be in that kind of business. So the idea then is that if Harry Potter's coming to an end, we've got to have another franchise tentpole kind of factory that we can peg a decade around, that's why you get Fantastic Beasts. It's why you get Hobbit spread into 3 films. It's like, we know we can make X amount on these kind of movies, moving ahead. So there's all these kind of failed attempts to do kind of like Justice League before, around the time they were doing The Dark Knight and all this, all these kind of properties, attempts to make films that didn't work. George Miller's Justice League, wasn't it? I mean, that was to try and spin all these other sort of things out. I think that's, I think Harry Potter has a huge role to play in the way that this is conceived. I think because then DC is seen as a kind of similar silo of franchises that they can build a long-term plan around. And then obviously the success of Marvel makes that even more kind of permeate through the culture. But I think, look at Star Trek. I mean, look at the way that they did. I mean, I think people forget, the way that Marvel were doing things, the way Kevin Feige is doing it, is what Rick Berman did with Star Trek in the 1980s and 90s. I mean, it's exactly the same. And he's a huge Star Trek fan, isn't he? And worked with Ralph Winter, who was one of the producers of the Star Trek films on those X-Men films back in the day. What we talk about, what the Wachowskis did, you also then have to, all of these things kind of accumulate and create the kind of future, don't they? But if you look at what Berman did with those films, the end of the original Star Trek movies, then the spin-off of the Next Generation, and then doing another 2 shows while the Next Generation became movies. And you can argue whether these are successful or not, or whatever, but that was 20 odd years worth of stuff. In fact, if you go back to when, say, it starts with Wrath of Khan, in 82, when does it die? Is it 2002, 2003 with Nemesis?
Yeah, I think it's early 2000s, isn't it?
So if you want to look at it, because really the modern Star Trek things begins with the Wrath of Khan. It's 20 plus, just over 20 years.
2002 Nemesis.
Yeah, so 20 years roughly. And obviously that builds out of the fact you've got this kind of this successful film that, the motion picture, which is kind of too expensive and all the rest of it, but that was there in the late 70s as well. So it's a long-term sort of process, that they were doing. They were playing a long game, and I think that's the thing with Fate. I think the other thing is that they're just other studios, and we're talking about studios rather than sort of like independent production companies or whatever, that, how are they going to, there aren't that many properties out there that lend themselves to this type of sort of blanket bombing approach. And I think the crucial thing with Marvel is it's about the Marvel universe. It's not about an individual character. And that has always been true throughout the whole kind of DC's history was always about great creators doing groundbreaking work. That would be Frank Miller on Batman. That would be John Byrne on Superman. That would be Grant Morrison and Dave McKean doing Arkham Asylum. Alan Moore doing The Killing Joke. Frank Miller on Batman Year One with David Mazzucchelli, and Watchmen. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons doing that. When they finished off V for Vendetta around that time. But it's interesting if you look at those that influx of stuff into the kind of the sort of pop culture mix from there. A lot of those things kind of begin from like more, from a corporate kind of mindset as well. I do think it's not a surprise that Marvel borrowed the money to set up Marvel Studios and do it on their own. You can't underestimate that was an independent production company.
Yeah.
That gets forgotten about, but they took the risk. And at DC, Warner Brothers, when they took the risk on Chris Nolan, that was because they had some executives there that still had kind of their feet in the world of cinema that was still very much driven by the role of indie cinema. And don't underestimate the role of Steven Soderbergh. Because he got Nolan the job on Insomnia. True. And he was the gatekeeper into that. It was a very different world. The people who've run the studios. I mean, if you look at Warner Brothers, I know I used to work for DC, and the management structure now and the ownership of it is completely different. The fact we're now in this Warner Media Discovery, whatever it's called, world now is a totally different thing, and it's all about how much content you can create for the platforms or whatever else, and it's a different world. And I think that is, I don't know whether you can kind of come up with the next big thing, you know, from their mindset where they are. They're not really looking for that. They're still looking to kind of revamp, reboot, you know, readapt.
I think in a sense the way to do it, it wouldn't be so much to write a screenplay, but to write a series of books. You know, I mean, it would be that's where they're going to go fishing. They're going to go fishing with a property that people already have some sort of, and they can see it. It's there. It's got proven success. You know, or you know, or comic books or books, irregardless. Listen, James, I want to talk to you some more, because we haven't even talked about the Dread movies and the various permutations, and Rogue Trooper to be coming. So we're gonna stop here, but I would definitely love you to come on again and for us to speak a bit more about this, because I fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And
hopefully it's coherent.
I'm positive it is. As soon as I stop talking, the quality goes up significantly. But before you leave, I do need a recommended book off you, a film book that you would suggest for our listeners.
The last one I read that I thought was really good was the Paul Hirsch book about editing. I can't remember it. What's it called? I can't remember the title. I've got it next door.
A Long Time Ago in a Cutting Room Far, Far Away.
That's the one. That's the last one I read that I really loved. And I think he and talking about editing, I mean, I think he kind of like, it's really interesting as an editor, someone who worked on those, on so many interestingly different films, like Star Wars, obviously, Empire Strikes Back, obviously, but then things like Ferris Bueller.
Mission Impossible.
And working with, then he did Ghost Protocol. He's talking about differences between working with Brad Bird and working with Brian De Palma, because he worked with Brian De Palma a lot, didn't he? I think that's how he got onto Star Wars, because of the Lucas De Palma connection. So I'd say that one, right. Once Upon a Time in a Cutting Room Far Away. That's a great one. I mean, and I guess if I was to think of another one, maybe Cronenberg on Cronenberg is a favourite of mine. Always thought that's a very interesting, of that type of book that those old Faber and Faber ones that they used to do. I thought was one of them was interesting, because I think Cronenberg's one of the more reflective people who talks about their own films. I think he's kind of I'd say those two. That would be good. Go for the Paul Hirsch one.
Yeah, Cronenberg is a real intellectual, and he's a very articulate, very brilliant at communicating his ideas. I remember going to the press conference for A Dangerous Method, which I think is an underrated film, but not one of his best films. But his press conference was better than the film. I mean, I'm not slagging off the film at all, but the press conference was fascinating. Was like, you know,
I interviewed him on a round table once with Robert Pattinson when they'd done Cosmopolis,
right?
And he was I didn't have very long with him, but he was great.
Mm-mm. The man speaks.
Very
the man speaks in paragraphs. It's amazing. Brilliant, James. Thanks so much for agreeing to talk to me, and thanks for those recommended books, and thanks just for shedding. Yeah, I feel like I've really learned a lot about the franchise, the state of cinema at the moment, and especially popular entertainment cinema.
Hopefully.
So that was my conversation with James. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I had a great time talking to him. I really felt that I was learning something as we went through, with lots of observations there, which changed my perspective. I have to say, made me look at things a little bit differently. I think as well the Thor: Love and Thunder sort of reception has been weirdly mixed up with this idea that Taika Waititi has somehow fallen from grace. So it was kind of interesting to just talk about the film on its own merits, rather than in the Twitter sphere of the current backlash, forward lash that is going on, lashes of lashes there. All that remains is for me to thank James for talking to me, and I can't wait to sort of finish that conversation. Thank you also to Elliot Atkins for the music. Thank you to Ali Harwood for the art. And thanks to you, dear listener. Hopefully, we'll talk next week.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.